From The Australian, here's what's on the front. I'm Kristen Amiot. It's Thursday, July 10, 2025. Donald Trump is back at it again with the tariffs. And this time, he says he'll impose import duties on copper and pharmaceutical products. It means the Albanese government is again under pressure to make a deal. Today, economics correspondent Matthew Cranston unpacks the latest from Donald Trump's trade war. Remember this?
My fellow Americans, this is Liberation Day. Waiting for a long time.
At the start of April, President Donald Trump announced the United States would impose sweeping tariffs on exporters around the globe.
In a few moments, I will sign a historic executive order instituting reciprocal tariffs on countries throughout the world. Reciprocal, that means they do it to us and we do it to them. Very simple, can't get any simpler than that.
It meant anyone selling goods to the United States would be subject to a 10% baseline import duty, with higher tariffs imposed on countries who carried the biggest trade deficits with the US.
Indonesia, Malaysia, Cambodia. Oh, look at Cambodia, 97%. We're going to bring it down to 49. They made a fortune with the United States of America.
Economists panicked.
The economic fallout from President Trump's tariffs has heightened concerns of a recession and a global trade war.
Financial markets plummeted.
Today, the Australian share market went into meltdown. $25 billion wiped off the ASX.
And no one was spared.
More bizarre still, the remote Australian territory of Heard Island also tariffed 10%. Those tariffs may be hard to collect, though, because its main inhabitants are penguins.
Now, the deal-maker-in-chief says he'll hit us where it really hurts, right in our $4.5 billion pharmaceutical export sector.
And we'll be announcing something very soon on pharmaceuticals. We're going to give people about a year and a half to come in, and after that they're going to be tariffed if they have to bring the pharmaceuticals into the country, the drugs and other things into the country. They're going to be tariffed at a very, very high rate, like 200%. We'll give them a certain period of time to get their act together, but they were all here.
The pharmaceutical industry employs about 70,000 people in Australia. Last year, Australian manufacturers exported just over $2.2 billion in pharmaceutical goods to the United States. That's a bit under half of the sector's total export value. So, should we be worried?
Well, most of the people that analyse all this stuff have said it's going to be a big cost burden and a big hit to the economic activity that the pharmaceutical industry brings.
Matthew Cranston is the Australian's economics correspondent.
Barclays, for example, have said that they think it'll hit about $1.8 billion worth of economic activity related to pharmaceutical manufacturing in Australia. So that's pretty substantial, I suppose, in the context of the broader economy. We've got a $2 trillion economy in Australia, so maybe it's not that big. But, if you talk to people in the industry, that's going to seriously affect them. And of course, there's lots of pharmaceutical manufacturing throughout Southeast Asia, so that's going to be locked. And Australia does provide a lot of inputs that go to some of those manufacturers.
Trump's announcement, if you can call it that, was made in the middle of an almost 2-hour cabinet meeting where everything from the floods in Texas to America's bombing of Iran was on the table. But can you call it unexpected?
It's a difficult question to answer. The reason why is because everything Donald Trump does is unexpected. You just don't know where he's going to go next, right? So in that regard, yes, it's unexpected. This is what is creating problems for equities markets, bond markets, and even just businesses that want to work out how much money to put in new investment, how many more employees to bring on to their business. They don't know where this is going to go, so they can't work out what the cost of their inputs are going to be. They don't know what the demand of it's going to be. So there's all these things that have to play out. There's so many different factors, and all that uncertainty creates angst. And that's why you see such a huge amount of volatility in all these different financial markets.
And what about the opportunities?
I have been speaking to someone who's very senior in pharmaceutical land, that being Brian McNamee. He's the chairman of CSL, third biggest company on the ASX. And he has said, yes, obviously it's going to hurt CSL a bit, but he says, actually, when you think this through on an economic basis, Australia does gain a lot from America in its innovation of drugs. And our pharmaceutical benefits scheme is constructed to minimise the price of all that innovative drug coming to Australia. And it can actually, the pricing mechanisms, prevent other drugs coming from America into Australia. So he's not saying that, tear it down. He's not saying that the US is even trying to tear it down. He's saying that Australia gets enormous benefit from America, and maybe we can adjust our PBS to make it more efficient, to accelerate more drugs coming in from overseas, and in some ways also reflect a bit of the costs that America bears in creating all these drugs and providing it to the rest of the world. So, that's controversial for an Australian. He's not being nationalistic here, but he's just saying, look, there is a benefit that we get that we're not fully paying for. And he says it's not unreasonable of the Americans to ask this. And he likens it also to how we gain a lot from the innovation in US defence.
On Tuesday morning, Donald Trump shared the correspondence he sent to 14 heads of state in Thailand, Cambodia, Belgrade, Tunisia and others, notifying them that because no deal had been reached since Liberation Day, a slew of country-specific tariffs would come into effect on August 1.
August 1st they pay. And everybody pays, everybody has to pay, and the incentive is that they have the right to deal in the United States. If they don't want to, they don't have to pay and they don't have to deal here.
Matt, the deadline for the nations affected by the Liberation Day tariffs to make a deal with the United States has been paused a couple of times since April 2, though Donald Trump is adamant this is their last chance. What does that tell you about how committed Donald Trump is to this new pharmaceutical tariff, which he says won't be implemented for a year or so to give producers time to adjust their supply chains? Do you think it'll actually happen?
If I knew that, I could probably make a lot of money. But if you come back to the rationale for why he's doing it, he thinks it's two reasons, right? One, he actually thinks there is a national security threat to some of these industries. That's how he's able to actually impose these tariffs. China or India or some other country that may be seen as an adversary is got a stranglehold over a certain industry, whether it's pharmaceuticals, whether it's critical minerals, whether it's anything else. And he's saying, look, America needs to be more self-reliant on this. And look, a lot of economists think part of that is right. Even in Australia, we think there is a little bit of truth to this. The second rationale is that he needs to raise money to pay for these big tax cuts that he's just passed under the big, beautiful bill in America. He needs to raise, some people say it's about $300 billion a year or something like this. Whether or not he can get that depends on how strong he goes on all these tariffs. And I think that he needs to raise money to help pay for the tax cuts, to help him push through more economic activity and make sure that by the time the midterm elections come up, that he's got America back on a solid footing and that he's got Republicans supporting him and voting for him.
Coming up, that's not all, folks. Trump's tariffs are also coming for copper. At Tuesday's White House cabinet meeting, President Donald Trump also announced an import duty of 50% would be imposed on copper. That new tariff could come into effect sooner than the proposed 200% pharmaceutical tariff. Here's Matthew Cranston.
This is a complex one because, once again, trying to predict the price on copper because of a tariff is a little bit fraught. Some people are saying that'll be neutral. There are other stronger things that drive the price, and part of that is the demand for renewable energies. Now, there's a lot of money being invested in renewable energies, and one of the essential ingredients is copper. So, if anything, this tariff might create a higher price for it. And certainly if there's a tariff on it, it might mean rerouting of trade and supply chain of copper. And so that can only mean a slightly higher price. And if there's a higher price, that means it's going to be more expensive to create renewable energies. Now, most people say they don't think they're deliberately trying to can renewable energies. What they think they're trying to do is back to this point about national security. Too much reliance on copper refinery and critical minerals refinery happens in China. America doesn't want that. So there's a problem there. And if they get into a war or something, you don't want to be relying on China for all these critical minerals that go into important defense equipment and articles. So if the tariff, it's going to be hard to work it out. But one thing you can be assured of is that there's probably going to be a bit of a slowdown in renewable energy outputs.
Matthew Cranston is the Australian's economics correspondent. You can read all the latest from the White House and around the world anytime at theaustralian.com.au.